Hello, the name's BrianTheBrain. You know what is truly remarkable? No, not the fact that I'm a talking brain with air. It's the fact that it's been 8 years since Aether was released to the public, and is still going strong to this day. It's actually even bigger than it was when the game first came out, and even when the workshop characters first came out. I'm sure you know what this game is about if you clicked on this video, but for those of you who aren't in the know, allow me to introduce you to the game. Rivals of Aether is a platform fighting game that takes heavy inspiration from Super Smash Bros., with the main differences in combat being that there's no shielding and there's no grabbing. Instead, you have a parry as a replacement for the shield. There's also no ledge grabbing, but instead wall jumping to get back your up special, which makes being off stage much more dangerous. It definitely takes the most inspiration from Super Smash Bros. Melee due to its fast-paced and aggressive nature, and it's great as a competitive game because of it. It's even got wave dashing, just in case you were worried it wasn't already enough like Melee. Attacks themselves are also different due to the differentiation between normal attacks and strong attacks. Both of them are on separate inputs, where normal attacks are just like the normal tilts and such in Smash, and strong attacks are this game's equivalent Smash attacks. You still have special moves as well, and up special is still your main recovery option. The game's unique way of going about the Smash formula is a big part of why it's as big as it is today, as it's just genuinely really fun. The game even has rollback netcode, and that's something Super Smash Bros. Ultimate's Online can't say about itself. For an indie game, it has a pretty big competitive community, with major venues like Genesis and Heatwave giving out a prize pool of almost $10,000, which is insane for a game like Rivals. Rivals is big for sure, but it isn't Brawlhalla levels of big, so a prize pool of 10,000 is incredible for a smaller indie game like Rivals. One of the main draws to the game besides its competitive community and great gameplay is the game's workshop community. The workshop was added to the game in 2019, and ever since, there's been over this much content made for the game as of the making of this video. There's some crazy stuff here, such as characters that can end you in seconds flat like Ronald McDonald, and a stage that's based off the GameCube, kind of like that one battle mode track in Mario Kart Double Dash, and so much other stuff. The base game alone still has quite a bit of content too though, with over 18 characters and 15 stages. The game is very balanced despite its rather large roster for an indie game. Even the worst character in the game can do quite a bit of damage, unlike Kirby and Melee who can barely do anything. All of what is said combined is exactly the reason why the game is as big as it is today, and it's incredibly impressive considering that the game was initially made by a very small team, led by Dan Fornes. Nowadays, he has a much bigger team helping him out, and Rivals of Aether 2 has come out pretty recently. After having played it myself, I can definitely say it has lived up to expectation and then some. The game did have a lot to live up to, considering just how amazing of a game Rivals 1 is for pretty much any kind of player, whether you're a part of the casual community or the competitive one. It took Rivals 1 as a game about 11 years since its early access release in 2014 to become what it is today, and this journey really puts into perspective just how far the series, its community, and its developers have come. If you clicked on this video, you're probably A, someone who is curious about Rivals and wants to be filled in on the franchise's history after having played Rivals 2, or are interested in trying Rivals 2 and the series as a whole, or B, someone who is already aware of what Rivals is and follows the scene frequently, and wants to see how it covered the game's rather extensive history. Whatever side you fall on, I can assure all of you that I will be covering the game in depth, such as its development, its competitive scene, and its community overall. Before I get into the nitty gritty of it, I want to give a special thanks to Cake Assault, one of the game's best pro players, for helping me out when it came to giving me some of the information I needed to make this video possible in the first place. There's a lot to cover with this game, despite its 11 years of existence, but trust me, 11 years is quite a bit for a fighting game, especially one that was as frequently updated as Rivals. In actually doing that, it would only make sense to start with the games. Circling back to what I said in the intro, the entire game was initially made by a really small team, and the leader of that team is Dan Fornes. Dan Fornes had started off as an independent developer in college, and eventually in 2011, he would release a game called Super Smash Land. Super Smash Land, as the name implies, is very reminiscent of Super Smash Bros., and is basically a remake of the formula that was made with the intention of feeling like a Game Boy game. That's made pretty evident by the game's multiple shades of green. It's like if a booger became a video game. Not as a nod to the game, of course, because this game is shockingly good for something so simple and made by a Dan Fornes who hadn't started development on Rivals yet. A lot of the staples of Rivals can be seen with this game, such as the lack of shields and grabbing. The game has 6 characters, those being Mario, Link, Kirby, Pikachu, Mega Man, and Vaporeon. There's also 11 stages in total. The main mode of the game is the arcade mode, which is basically just classic mode from the official games. Playing this game for the first time after having seen everything Rivals has been through is quite an interesting experience. It's so easy to see the groundwork that was established with this game, and how integral it was to Rivals in its development. This game was a big learning experience for Dan, and after leaving college, he would go on to join Microsoft Studios, working as a designer for games like Trials Evolution, the game where you can make John Trials himself make funny bike go vroom. After 2 years and 9 months, he would leave Microsoft Studios in April 2014 to become a full-time indie developer. He, along with the game's composer Flashy Goodness, started work on Rivals shortly after Dan's departure from the studio, and the game would be first announced on July 7, 2014, showcasing Tetherball and Orcane. Orcane in particular is heavily based off Vaporeon in Super Smash Land, and is basically an evolution of that character from the game. A month later, it would be announced that the game would be released on the Xbox One in the Idea at Xbox program. And September 22nd, 2015, the game would be put into early access and be readily available on Steam, and this would be where the game got its real start and started being talked about by way more people than just a handful of Xbox One users. The game would continue to receive new characters afterwards, with the finished game being released on PC on March 28, 2017, to very positive reception by the general public. More videos began to be made on the game from various YouTubers such as Alpharad and Cherrick the Gaming Dragon, and the game would continue to soar in popularity in the coming months. Just 5 months after the game's full release, the game got its first wave of DLC with Ori and Sin, the protagonists of the game Ori and the Blind Forest. The game will continue to get more DLC with characters like Reno, Quarren, Sylvanos, and Eliana, and in late 2018, Shovel Knight joined Ori as the second third-party character of the game's roster. Up until that point, there were 14 characters in the game, which is quite a bit for a fighting game as intrinsically detailed and polished as Rivals, alongside 15 stages that each have their own theme and layout. The full release of the game prompted more people to join the competitive community, which I will further touch on later, and everything was pretty normal all things considered. That was, of course, until the release of what I am about to speak of next, which forever changed the game's community and how it was perceived by others, not negatively of course, mostly anyway, and had introduced way more people to the game than before, the Workshop. On August 9, 2019, it would be revealed that Steam Workshop support is coming to the game, with Sandberg being the character used to show off the capabilities of the Workshop and the opportunities that it will bring for aspiring developers. The reception of this news was very positive, and people were eager to see what Workshop support will bring to the table for the game. On September 18th of that same year, the Workshop was released, and now anyone could create anything their hearts desired, whether it was a balanced character that fit alongside the roster, or some absolutely bonkers batshit insane character that completely breaks the game with how good they are. It was all up to you on what you wanted to make. Of course, there would be a ton of mods that added in characters from Smash, same moveset and all, as well as a bunch of meme characters and broken characters. Usually those two were the same, but there was also a lot of completely original characters that actually fit quite nicely into the game's normal meta, such as characters like Olympia, Molo, Hodon, and Palm, who, believe it or not, were actually added to the game's base roster on February 3rd, 2022, as part of the Workshop Characters Pack, which was actually also released alongside the addition of rollback netcode into the game. 2022 was truly a good year in the city for Rivals. Anyway, you can bet that with the addition of the Workshop, there would also be a lot of videos covering characters from it, with one of my personal favorites being Alpharad's Ronald McDonald video. The Workshop update is also what got me into the game as well, as since I am what you would like to call a resident Smash fan, I was very eager to try out the game and see what it was like. Before having made this video, I assumed that at least most others loved the workshop update. After all, there's even dedicated competitive tournaments held with workshop characters that have their own set of rules and guidelines, so you'd think that it was received pretty positively, right? Well, you should know by now that whenever someone asks a question like that, it's always the exact opposite answer. Well, yes, for the most part, the workshop was received pretty well. Many people actually didn't like its addition, since some of the community felt as though due to the addition of characters from the workshop like Ronald McDonald and 100% Accurate Fox, another choke character that's broken on purpose, they think that's all Rivals will be known for by casuals and newer fans of the game, just as the game has funny haha Lamau custom characters, and not the deep intricate competitive game that it can be. Keikosol explains it in further detail here.
Well, when it first came out, it was very exciting because that's that's so cool to be in a game that people can make their own characters and stages and whatever, and they can put their own creations into Rivals, and it's not just confined to what the developers make, but people can make things for the game too, and that was awesome.
Yeah.
And then it was just Ronald McDonald and 100% Accurate Fox and just 100 of those characters. And so then the mystique and everything that was cool about Workshop was like taken away, and like all the competitive players around looking at it, and it's like, is this really what our game is known for now? And that's where the hatred started towards Workshop.
To give my own 2 cents as still a more recent fan of the game, of course having gotten into it myself when the Workshop came out, I didn't even know of Rivals' existence until the Workshop update. That was my actual introduction to the game, and I must admit, I didn't understand the game's bigger picture, and I too just played it as a funny and wacky game to be played with friends to mess around with the custom characters. But I did eventually learn to appreciate the game for what it's supposed to be later on, and I know a lot of other people who truly cared about the game and wanted more of it did the same. I can understand where the community was coming from. They don't want a game that they're passionate about to be thought of as a joke or the off-brand version of another game, and I feel the same way about other games as well, but I do think that they were overreacting. The Workshop is all for fun after all, and it's a completely different side of the game that you don't have to interact with if you don't want to. I also never see anyone just call Rivals the game where you can make Ronald McDonald fight Colonel Sanders nowadays anyway, so that does help. I feel like that description is more so supposed to fit Mugen if anything. Look, say what you want still about the Workshop, but you can't deny how big it was in bringing so much more people to the game, and not to the detriment of the game itself. I probably wouldn't even have made this video or played the game as a whole if it weren't for the Workshop, so I would say it succeeded in what it set out to do, which is to bring more people to the game, normal players and developers alike. Plus, you can't deny how cool some of these characters are. Like, come on, you can play as Peppino Spaghetti from Pizza Tower with this feature. How could you ever say no to this?
Oh, I always hated this part.
You know though, speaking of characters, now that we've covered the Workshop, there's still another very important topic that I need to touch on that I alluded to earlier in the video, and it's about the part of the community that makes any fighting game alive even past its lifespan, and that is the competitive community. Trust me, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to all of the major tournaments that happened throughout the course of the game's life up until now, so without further ado, let's talk about... What fighting game is complete without its competitive scene? The thing about Rivals that makes it different over any other fighting game, including Smash, is how stage-centric competitive play is. What I mean by this is that there are 2 things in competitive Rivals play that are crucial to being a good player, those being ledge dashing and platform dropping. Platforms especially are very important. The player gains a huge advantage on the platform even when they're cornered by the opponent, and at any time, the person on the platform can do a platform drop aerial and regain the advantage state. Combined with the use of ledge dashing, the game is very neutral heavy, and once someone gets a hit in, it becomes incredibly aggressive just in the flip of a switch, and it makes each close confrontation with your opponent feel tense. It wasn't exactly always like that, however. What I just described was the game's current meta, but back then you saw much less of that in the competitive scene, especially in the first tournaments for the game. There's been quite a lot of Rivals tournaments ever since the game's first release on the Xbox One, with one of the first major ones being the EVO Invitational in 2015, where competitive players Kate and Seaman fought in a Crag Ditto, and I gotta say, these older tournament matches are pretty cool to watch for someone who got into the game quite a bit after. It's always interesting to look back on these older tournament matches and go, wow, the game has really changed quite a bit since then, huh? Especially when compared to the more recent tournaments like last year's Genesis X, where Cake Assault and Soul Rifle 211 fought each other in that tournament's grand finals. Besides the EVO Invitational in 2015, there were other major tournaments for the game before it officially released on Steam, such as the Super Smash Con venue and the Shine venue in 2016. Players of the game can really see where the meta starts to shift to one thing, such as the ever-increasing presence of platform dropping as the game's meta evolved. One thing I noticed within the community when it comes to how they view the competitive play throughout the years is how they talk about the neutral, and whether they like it or hate it. The point of contention here is that if you are the faster character against the enemy, you just overall have a higher threat level than the enemy and being able to outrange them and outspeed them, whereas the slower character has to get close to even just threaten the faster character a little bit. It's why a character like Quarren can't just overextend and threaten the character like Orcane more, since Orcane has more speed, and in general has more tools than Quarren. Players talk about how this meta makes the game very speed focused, and how you typically have the advantage right off the bat if you are the faster character. I do actually agree with this view for the most part. The faster characters usually have the best platform drop aerials in the game, which further makes speed the name of the game. I wouldn't really consider this a huge issue, but it is something that I'm glad that they fixed in Rivals 2. I personally think most players love the gameplay of competitive Rivals mostly for its aggressive nature that is shown time and time again in the tournaments, which makes it both fun to watch and especially fun to play. It wasn't exactly all sunshines and rainbows for the competitive scene though, since like I mentioned before in the workshop section of this video, there was a lot of division and discourse in the community about the advent of the workshop, and how it would create separate tournaments made for them, and eventually would even have its own influence on the normal meta of the game with the previously workshop only characters, those being Olympia, Palm, Hodan, and Malo when they were added to the game's base roster in 2022. To stop myself from sounding like a broken record, first, I will fix the record player itself, and then I will proceed to go into how Rivals, as a series, mostly due to its competitive community, helped a lot in establishing platform fighters as something more than a niche that just consisted of Smash clones and nothing more. Do keep in mind how old Rivals is. It's over 11 years old now, and its sequel came out recently for crying out loud. You can just imagine how much it had helped in improving the overall image of platform fighters as a whole. Rivals would mostly get its traction in 2017 when it officially came out, of course, but even back then, there was really just Smash, and Smash 4 was already 3 years old at this point. Not to mention that the character that practically ruined that game's own competitive community, she shall not be named, you should know who I'm talking about, had recently come out. 5 years earlier, we got PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, and most of the people that I've seen touch the game usually avoid it, just like how Sony itself avoids making any games that aren't action-adventure single-player games that are just The Last of Us reskins. And the failure that is Sony's current live service ventures, considering the absolute choke of a launch that Concord had. That game was hated due to its very odd gameplay of needing to use basically final smashes to kill your opponents. You couldn't simply send them flying off the map and have that be the end of it. The game also lacked any cool combos, and the meta was very unbalanced, favoring characters such as Sly and Cat. It also didn't help that you needed to buy an online pass just to play online. Remember when some games require you to pay a pass to play online? It's like being asked to buy a game, and then needing to pay extra just to enable an entire portion of the game that should have already been enabled to begin with. Oh wait, that's something that's very common nowadays, sadly, never mind. This is modern gaming fun. Anyway, the point is that before Rivals, there was literally only Smash, nothing else was even close to competition. I remember back when the game first came out, and people were calling it a Smash clone, simply due to how the perception of platform fighters besides Smash was in the 2010s. People definitely sing different tunes about platform fighters now though, especially after we got games like Brawlhalla, Nick All-Stars Brawl 1 and 2, and Multiverses. It's crazy just how much set perception has changed in the course of just 8 years, and a lot of that does have to do with Rivals, even if sometimes you could argue that a lot of people simply thinking it's the game where you can make weird matchups happen didn't exactly aid the game. Though like I said before, I think the workshop did a lot more good than harm. At this point, it would be the most appropriate to move into the last section of the video, where I show just how much Rivals has changed platform fighters and the fighting game community as a whole, and put into scale just how big the series is today, and why, if you haven't already, you should definitely try out the games yourself. It's time to talk about Legacy. It's a 3-syllable word, 4 if you're really fancy, and it's used to describe the impact of something, whether it's long-lasting or short-term, or whether it's about a thing, a person, a place, or, in this instance, the impact of Rivals, and how it was overall very beneficial to the fighting game community, and how fighting games are viewed as a whole. Rivals has played a big part in opening the eyes of other developers and publishers to take a slice of the platform fighter pie, something most were scared to do due to Smash's monopoly on the genre. The game that was made by just a few guys as a passion project has now blossomed into a franchise with very surprising success. I like to think that the existence of Nick All-Stars Brawl and Multiverses was partly inspired by the combined efforts of Rivals and Brawlhalla. It's hard to say just how much of a role those games had in that inspiration, but there's no way that there wasn't at least some kind of inspiration going on there, especially with how Nick All-Stars Brawl specifically plays. In general, it's a genre that is much more respected now than it used to be, and we're still getting more and more games. I haven't even talked about Fraymakers, another platform fighter being made by the same guys who made mine, and I assume a lot of your guys' childhood as well, Super Smash Flash 1 and 2. That game is still in early access, but I'm pretty sure that the game should be getting out of it sometime this year, and so far it's a great time, and I can't wait to see what they'll do with it. The future of platform fighters in general looks pretty bright, especially with the release of the most important thing to come out of Rivals' legacy, Rivals 2. Rivals 2 is incredibly fun. They definitely deliver with what I wanted out of a sequel to the original game, such as making the game not as aggressive as the original with the introduction of shields and grabs to the series, and overall just how fun it is to both play and watch. There's already been quite a few tournaments for the game, and of course some content creators making videos on the game, such as AlphaRad coming back to the series. Last month's LACS Rivals tournament was insane to watch. Besides the sequel, however, surprisingly, there's been a few other spin-off games that don't have much to do with the main games. There's Creatures of Aether, a PvP and PvE card game where you have to go through dungeons to get more cards, though you can also buy them with real money with the game's microtransactions. It looks like an interesting game, but I'm not personally into card games, so I don't really have much to add here. There's also Lovers of Aether, which is exactly how it sounds. It's a dating simulator where you go on dates with some of the Rivals cast in some kind of alternate reality world. It's a pretty weird game, and I haven't played it either since, brains don't go on dates. And I also just don't like dating simulators anyway, so this isn't really my cup of tea. Last but not least, however, and is the most recent out of these spin-off games, Dungeons of Aether, which is a turn-based dungeon crawler that takes place in the Rivals universe. Again, also haven't played this one since I'm not a dungeon crawler guy either. I know it may seem like I'm not into a lot of things, but trust me guys, I have beaten Ratchet & Clank Going Commando over 20 times, so I'm definitely a guy that tries new things, I swear. Hi Chess, but at the very least, it shows the scale of the franchise that is Rivals. It isn't just 2 fighting games, it's an entire franchise that Dan and his team have tried to make into something bigger with their lofty ambitions. Even if one of said ambitions includes the game where you can date Maple in a schoolgirl uniform apparently. All you really gotta do to see how influential Rivals was in helping out the fighting game community is just seeing how the first game, this indie Smash clone, in big old quotation marks, made by 2 guys, mostly by one, is now this big franchise with its own spin-offs and a sequel, and its reach across the gaming community as a whole with videos online and its own influence on platform fighters that would come out later. With how good Rivals 2 is, and how big the series itself is already, I can't wait to see what Dan and the others have in store for the series next. Whether it's Rivals 3, or, I don't know, a survival horror game set in the Rao's universe where you play as the Rao's characters, where you have to try and survive against the workshop's most abominable creations, with the boss of all of them being Ronald McDonald or some shit, I don't know. With all that being said, thank you guys for your time, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day. And I hope that this video has inspired you to either try Rao's for the first time, or at least keep up with the game's community. I'm gonna go practice my setup or neutral special combos again. Hopefully get to the point where I don't fumble like a moron and get punished by arcane players for just trying to do a combo. Catch you all later.